This is Arctostaphylos uva ursi. This is an interesting evergreen ground cover. It's a member of the Ericaceae, and it's a very, very widely distributed shrub. You can find it in northern Europe, in the mountains of France, in the Pyrenees, or I guess that's maybe Spain, and across the top of North America and right down into California. And in fact, right down into the mountains of Guatemala. And so very, very widespread species, and depending on where you collect it, the cold hardiness differs. So most of what we grow in the Vancouver area is hardy to at least zone 5, and sometimes even hardier than that. It's a pretty easy plant to recognize. It has leaves that are alternately arranged, and they tend to stand up on the stems. So the stems are horizontal, and you have these leaves that stand up. Only when you grow this in the shade, where it doesn't like it, do the leaves kind of relax and sit down. But as you can see, it's a fairly dense carpet of leaves. The thing that Arctostaphylos uva ursi needs is well-drained soil. It will not grow in anything other than well-drained soil. And I've seen plantings around the Lower Mainland where people just don't get that, and they plant it in irrigated, moisture-retentive soils, and it just doesn't last. The flowers look like little, blueberry flowers. They're little ursulate white flowers, or sometimes pink, and they're not abundant. You see a few of them, and those are followed by little red berries. And I think the birds have picked all of the berries off of these. If we find some berries, we'll show you that. The leaves themselves are kind of elliptic, not generally any different than that. Green, very, very bright green in the summer, and turning this kind of rusty brown over the winter, depending again on where the plants come from. The name Arctostaphylos is Greek. It means Arctos, meaning the bear, and Staphylos meaning berries. And then the epithet uva ursi is Latin, and means berry and bear. So the whole scientific name means berry, bear, bear, berry, or something like that. And so you can use that name bearberry. That's a typical common name. It's also known as Kinnickinnick, and Kinnickinnick is a First Nations name, and it means tobacco, or a kind of an addition to tobacco. And it was often smoked, but not by itself, but adding to tobacco. This is Berberis aquifolium. In some cases, if you're looking this up, you'll find it listed under Mahonia, M-A-H-O-N-I-A, Mahonia aquifolium. There's still some debate as to whether or not this really should be a Mahonia or a Berberis, but for the moment, we're calling it Berberis aquifolium. Aquifolium is a name that comes from the Greek aquila, the eagle's talons. And aquifolium, although it might sound like a watery surface, like a shiny surface, that's not what aquifolium means. Aquifolium, not aquafolium. Aqui meaning with sharp points. And in fact, the edges of these compound leaves, the leaflets, have spinose margins. Now they're not very spinose. They're pretty easy to handle. You're not going to hurt yourself by touching a Berberis aquifolium, but they do have those spiny tips. Now, as I say, this is a compound leaf. These leaves are typically have 7 to 9 leaflets. And the leaflets, as you can see, these leaflets gain size as they get toward the tips. So typically a small pair, and then the terminal leaflet is the largest. Very, very shiny. That's typical of the tall Oregon grape, or the tall Mahonia, however you like it. Now this is a very, very tall shrub. You'll see it mostly pruned in the landscape. It's a BC native broadleaf evergreen. It grows naturally in very well-drained, hot sites that don't get a lot of water in the summer, so it's actually ideal for a kind of xeriscape gardening. It's adapted to our summer drought, and it's a shrub that in the sun will grow to probably 3 or maybe even 3.5 meters, and in the shade will grow to 4.5 or 5 or maybe even 6 meters tall. And so again, the trick with this is to prune away the oldest, tallest branches right down at the base, and that encourages regrowth from the base. Now, the reason people grow this is not just the fact that it's an evergreen or native, but that it has in the spring beautiful displays of really, really bright yellow flowers. They're very, very fragrant, and they're attractive to bees, lots of nectar. And then those are followed by blue fruits, little berries that are edible, and they're known as Oregon grapes. But remember, this is the tall Oregon grape, not to be confused with the typical, the low Oregon grape. This is Brachyglottis sunshine. It has a weird name, sunshine. That's a cultivar, and it has that weird name because it's a hybrid shrub. This is a shrub that typically grows to about 1 meter tall and no more. It's relatively decumbent. Those stems are only strong enough to hold up to about 1 meter, and then they start to fall over, as you can see here. It is a hybrid of 3 species that are native to New Zealand. They're all evergreen shrubs, and this hybrid is probably hardier than any of the 3 parents. And so this hybrid was made to fill a kind of landscape niche, that is a plant for sunny, hot, not necessarily overly dry, but relatively dry conditions. It thrives in well-drained soil in the sun in Vancouver without much irrigation. But then it doesn't really get very hot in Vancouver in the summer, which is why it can tolerate not having irrigation. And so it's really good as a container plant. It's good on a sunny patio, that kind of thing. It is virtually indestructible unless we have a very, very cold winter, and then some of the branches can die back. But generally speaking, it can be pruned very, very hard, and it responds well. And the beauty of this shrub is really in the back of the leaf, which is this sort of startling gray-white. And you can see that as a margin around the sort of shiny green leaves. And so what that does is, in looking at it, you can see both the stems and the margins. So you have this green-gray combination. It's lovely. In the summertime, it produces flowers, and the flowers are yellow daisies. And some people think that those yellow daisies actually take away from the look of the shrub and will actually go in and cut them off. And I can understand that. We tend not to do that. I don't think the daisies are particularly horrible. But if what you're after is a kind of formal look, they do basically upset that formality. They don't produce any fruits, but the flower stalks kind of stick around, and that can look messy, which is another reason why you might want to take those off. The leaves themselves are more or less ovate, and they have a kind of a wobble on the edge. So you call that an undulate margin, not really toothed at all. Now this is, the really unusual thing about this is that it's a member of the sunflower family. And we don't have a lot of hardy plants in the sunflower family that are shrubs. And so this really kind of stands out in that respect. A really good, versatile landscape plant. It's not going to mix well with rhododendrons, but it's going to look good in a kind of xeriscape sort of situation where it's hot and dry. This is Calluna vulgaris. This is another member of the Ericaceae. Very, very small flowers with a persistent calyx, so that you can see on this shrub the sort of spent flowers, and you see the remnants of the flowers. These flowers are typically in the wild, they're typically a kind of a lavender purple, and Scottish people wax poetic about Calluna, which they call heather, and this is what we would call summer heather, blooms in the summertime. Has very, very tiny leaves. We'll show you those up close, and these kind of wiry stems that are decumbent. They fall down, and again, this is a shrub that grows to be about 1 meter tall. The flowers, as I say, are tiny. They're typically clustered toward the tips of the stems, and in the wild they can be browsed by animals, and if the animals take off the fresh green shoots, then they regrow, and that's a good a hint to landscapers not to cut too far back into the old growth for that to happen. So this is going to grow on very well-drained soil. Typically they like sandy soil, and they grow very well on sandy soil. And if you look closely at the plant, it looks a little bit like a hebe in miniature. You have these whorled leaves around the stem, but we'll have to get a good close-up of that. This is Choisya ternata. Choisya is native to Mexico and the extreme southwest of the United States. It's known as the Mexican mock orange. It's got nothing to do with oranges, but it does smell when it flowers. The flowers smell of orange blossom, and so that's why it's called mock orange, as in false orange, and Mexican because that's where it comes from. The name ternata refers to the ternate, or that is three-parted leaves, and so we would call these ternate or trifoliate leaves. They're oppositely arranged on the stems, and the leaves are green. Everything about this plant is very, very green, and the leaf arrangement is not just opposite, but more or less decusate, with those alternating pairs at right angles. One of the sort of distinctive things about Choisya is the way that the new leaves, or the youngest leaves, are unexpanded toward the tip. So the closer you get to the tip, the smaller the leaves become, and that really does lend a particular texture along with this sort of regular uh, arrangement of leaves. Now, what you can't tell, what I can tell because I'm handling this, is that there are glands that are covering this plant. And those glands give off a kind of a strong smell of, well, the name that people give it is rue. Rue is another member of this family, the Rutaceae. And many plants in this family, including oranges, including citrus, have this smell. If you bruise the leaves or just rub the stems, you will find that same smell. And Choisya tornata, although the flowers smell of orange blossom, the leaves smell of rue, and not everybody likes that smell. And so in terms of placing this shrub, and by the way, this shrub can grow upwards of 1.75 meters before it starts to fall apart. Nice big kind of billowy shrubs. What happens is if this is in a windy spot, or if it's in a place where pedestrians brush by, then you're going to constantly get that smell of rue, which again, not everybody likes. And so it's best to have this plant, sort of toward the back in a sheltered place, not too sheltered because it's subject to being attacked by mites. Mites are little sucking arachnids, spider relatives, that feed on the leaves if the air doesn't circulate adequately. So you want to have it in a sunny place, but in a protected place where there's good air circulation. Fruits, not that I've ever seen, but the flowers are lovely, and they're produced through the summer, mostly in June, but then sort of sporadically through the summer. And I think we'll get a shot of a couple of the spent flowers. This is Erica carnea. This is known in Europe, or at least by the English and the Scots. It's known as heath, so as not to be confused with Calluna vulgaris, which is known as heather. But generally speaking, in North America, people call this heather. And if you're concerned about offending Europeans, you could call it winter heather, which is in fact a fairly common name. It produces its flowers. You can see it's in bud right now, and it's November. So depending on the selection of Erica carnea, this will be in flower from the end of November anywhere until the end of April. And so that whole sort of midwinter to late spring, or to mid-spring, is fair game for Erica cultivars. The plant itself is fairly easy to recognize. It's a shrub. Some people might call it a shrublet because it doesn't grow very tall. It never grows more than about 20 centimeters tall. It has very wiry stems, and they kind of lie down. And again, it's another decumbent plant. So this is evergreen. It has needle-like leaves that are arranged in, I think they're pairs on the stems. No, they can't be pairs. This is, well, anyway, I can't really see. My eyesight's not that good. But I believe they're in small whorls, not in pairs. And the flower color ranges everything from white through a kind of lavender purple, with there are some very good rosy reds and deep pinks. And this is a species that's very closely related to a couple of other species in Europe that are a little bit taller, and sometimes hybrids are made. And so anything that looks like this that's over 20 centimeters tall is probably a hybrid. But most people just consider them all to be Erica carnea, and they all look pretty much alike other than being taller. So these are nice evergreen shrubs that require very well-drained soil. If they don't have well-drained soil, then they're short-lived. If the soil is compacted around them, like if people are walking, that's a surefire way to kill them. And they need sun, and they need a little bit of summer watering. So they're not very good, say, xeriscape plants. They really do require moisture the year round. They're often paired with dwarf conifers in collections, in little kind of arrangements. And so in small sort of urban or residential gardens, you'll see this. But I know gardeners who absolutely refuse to even consider growing Erica just because they're so difficult to work around with other plants. This is Escallonia Fradisi, or Frades eye. It's named, this is an Escallonia. The names of plants are often really interesting. Escallonia is named for a Spanish botanist named Escalon, and that's his whole name. He didn't have more than one name. It's just Escalon, and so this is Escallonia, which is a South American genus of plants that have alternate arrangement and glandular stems and leaves. And the glands on the stems are, particularly when it's hot, you smell Escallonia. It's a very, very pleasant kind of a resinous aromatic scent, but it's not overwhelming by any stretch. The name Frades eye, obviously it's a cultivar. It's enclosed in the single quotes, and this is named for the family Frades, who or Fredes, who I guess were Portuguese nursery people in California, and they bred this plant, which has a trade name, Pink Princess. And so Pink Princess is a very, very common, it's probably the most common of all Escallonias in Western North America. You can only grow Escallonias in Western North America and maybe Texas. They're heat-loving plants, and they love the sun. We have this in about 3/4 of a day of shade, and it still does very, very well. It's actually a really versatile plant. You can hedge it, you can let it do its thing. It flowers most of the summer, produces kind of a bright pink flower. You can see here the inflorescences, the spent inflorescence. There are no seeds in there as far as I can tell. It's probably a sterile hybrid. But depending on where you grow it, you can see this beautiful radial phyllotaxy, and that's maintained over the life of the plant. You can prune this baby hard, and it comes back and it looks spectacular. So unpruned, this is a shrub that's going to grow to 2 meters tall. In the shade, maybe a little taller than that, but in the sun, about 2 meters tall, and it's going to be very, very twiggy, and like I say, it's going to produce flowers all summer long. It flowers on the terminals, that is on the tips of the branches, and so in a hot climate, they keep pruning it back after flowering, and you get more flowers. In this climate, it just kind of takes its time and produces a few more shoots, and those flower. But it won't flower unless it's warm. Well-drained soil, not very fussy about water. You can probably grow this where there's little or no irrigation, other than in a very, very long drought. So this is a landscape shrub that many of you will probably already recognize. This is English lavender, or Lavandula angustifolia. Angustifolia means with narrow leaves, and so this is probably among the narrowest leaves of any of the lavenders. It's a very, very aromatic shrub. Most people would recognize the aroma even if they didn't recognize the plant. It reminds me of my grandmother's bathroom, because she would always have a bowl of lavender, the back of the toilet. Anyway, this is a very, very important crop. Lavender oil is extracted, and lavender is sold. If you want to go into business and grow lavender, Vancouver is not the place to do that, because lavender, although it grows very well in a place like this is very, very sandy, well-drained soil and lots of heat. And if you can do that, then you can grow lavender. But the best places to grow lavender have very, very dry conditions. That is low humidity, and low humidity throughout the year, and that's very, very useful. We tend to get sort of ugly, rotted leaves on the inside of the plant if plants are not taken care of. In the wild, this grows on rocky hillsides and tends to grow as a mound, and then gradually it opens up as the stems grow to the sides, and then it's sort of filled in by regrowth from the base. And so you can get these sort of gigantic mats of foliage. But in the landscape, they're typically clipped. Goats and sheep take care of that in the wild. Landscapers take care of that in our most of our commercial landscapes. This would be, I would consider this a short-lived plant in the landscape unless the conditions are ideal. And again, that's sun and well-drained soil. It's a fairly easy plant to recognize just by smelling it, but if you want to look at it up close, you'll notice that the leaves have a decusate arrangement. They're opposite and decusate, and that's typical of the mint family. This is a member of the mint family, the Lamiaceae. And the flowers also are produced in stalks that grow about 20 or 30 centimeters above the foliage, and they have beautifully arranged flowers around little whorls of stems all around the stem. So they look like little narrow clubs. And the color can be anything from white through dark purple. This is Leucothoe fontainesiana. Leucothoe is a shrub, a broadleaf evergreen shrub in the Ericaceae. It produces its flowers in the axils of the upper leaves on the stems, and you can see the flower buds are starting to expand right now, and this is typical at this time of the year. These plants were cut back a little bit in the summertime, and so we've got some regrowth that's red, and that's more typical of the spring color. Typically in the winter time, the leaves tend to go a little bit sort of bronzy red. That's their winter color. So the exposed leaves are bronzy red, and the shaded leaves are green. So a nice contrast there. This is a rhizomatous shrub. It grows to about maybe a meter tall, but it tends to form thickets of arching stems. And so what we typically do in the landscape is plant Leucothoe at about a meter spacing, and then once it's established, cut it back hard, and then that helps to kind of make a more uniform tall ground cover. So alternate arrangement, very, very distinctive in the way, almost a disticus arrangement, but not quite. And as you can see from this leaf. So the flowers are again like a blueberry flower, that ursulate flower, but in clusters, in racemes, in these axils. This is Veronica topiaria. If you were to look this plant up, you might find it under a variety of names. The most important issue is that the shrubby Veronicas were once classified under the genus name Hebe, H-E-B-E. And so you'll find most of the information about Veronica topiaria under Hebe topiaria, or you might find it under Hebe something else entirely. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to the Hebes, and we call them Hebe. We use that as a common name nowadays. Now this is a fairly easy to recognize group of broadleaf evergreen shrubs. They're all native, or almost all native, to New Zealand, and many of them are not particularly hardy, but the hardy Hebes, those that we can grow in gardens, are really great shrubs. They require sun and moisture, but well-drained soil. Now, what differentiates the shrubby Hebes, the shrubby Veronicas, from other plants is the sort of perfect decusate arrangement of the leaves. And that decusate, if you remember, decusate means with pairs of leaves at right angles to the pair above and below. And Hebes have untoothed leaves, they're entire leaves, and they range from scale-like leaves, very, very tiny leaves that are just a millimeter or two, to leaves that are upwards of 10 centimeters long. They're typically, and Hebe topiaria has leaves that are more or less ovate or elliptic. And so you have these beautiful overlapping pairs. Now what we see at the tips of the branches is we see some seed heads, and these represent the little tiny white flowers that were produced earlier this summer. So I'm just going to back up and show you what these shrubs are like. They're bare, typically bare on the inside and quite dense to the outside. You're not going to confuse the Hebes with much of anything else, either at close range or from a distance.